Hi, in this video let's take a look at a default scene in Vue and the ways in which we can make our own default scene to make our lives easier. So obviously by default Vue loads a standard scene. Let's look at some of the elements. We've got the ground, which has a default material, which is the natural grain. Personally, I've never liked that. It's something I like to change all the time. You also have a standard atmosphere, which has its faults as well in terms of how I like an atmosphere to operate. The other issues I have personally is with the cameras, position of the sun, so many things. So what I'll do is I'll show you a scene, a standard scene that I use quite regularly, and let's look at all of the things that I've changed. So let's open up that standard scene. And there it is. Nope, we're not going to save that. So the very first thing that you will notice is I've got a figure in the scene. I'm proposing that one of the useful aspects of setting up your own scene is to make sure from the very beginning you have a good sense of scale. A sense of scale when it comes to plants, when it comes to imported objects, in terms of the atmosphere itself. If you end up with an absolutely giant scene where we've zoomed in far too much or zoomed out far too much, should I say, we can have all sorts of problems with haze and fog and the way clouds behave. So starting off with an item which gives us a sense of scale is a good thing. In my humble opinion, that is. Let's have a look at what else I've done with this figure. I've also located the figure right on 0, 0, i.e. in the x-axis and the y-axis. That point there is 0, 0. Again, navigation within a scene can be made much more simple by being aware of the position of 0 in the screen. In the scene, sorry. I also put an item in the scene for this reason. If I've got that item selected and I go to options and we look at one very, very quick setting, which is here, center view objects when loading. What we have to do is we have to understand what that actually literally means. When it talks about the center, it's not talking about 0, 0. It's talking about the center of that viewport. So if I select that figure, let me just OK that, and go to add something into the scene. Let's put another figure in the scene, she'll do. Double click. Now you'll see, sorry, that wasn't done deliberately, but you'll see that she's ended up right in the middle of the scene. The only problem is she can't exist in the same space as the man, so Vue's plonked her on his head. Fortuitous, I wish I'd planned that. But you can see that by pre-selecting a figure or any object and then asking Vue to load something, the item ends up right where you want it to be. You know, let's get rid of the balancing act. That was funny. Okay. So again, when it comes to a standard scene, we need to be aware of our options. Okay, so point number one, let's drop a figure in. Let's put it at 0, 0. Let's make sure that he is the right height. I've got him set at about 6 foot. That's the height I wish I was, hence the reason the horizon line is down here, which is where I am relative to a 6 foot man. So getting back to the options. All sorts of things that we can look at. Some of the standard things, as I say, what I like to ensure, first of all, is centering the objects. Okay, display options. I personally find the wireframe selection colors to be quite distracting and difficult to read a scene once it gets very, very complicated. So I like to switch that off. Remember, this is you setting up your scene, setting up a scene the way you want it to work. So any of these options are down to you and what you prefer. They will all be remembered in the scene when the scene is saved. The other thing I very often look at is the OpenGL clipping. In other words, when the camera gets closer than 10 millimeters to the object, it'll start cutting the object off. Okay, it'll start getting to the point where it doesn't calculate the part closest to the camera, which is closer than 10 millimeters. And again, anything which is 10 kilometers away, it will not show. It may be that eventually you want to change that to 10 meters. Remember that the more view has to show, i.e. try and display in the viewport, the more RAM it's using, the more memory it's using. So if we cut that down to say 10 meters, it's not trying to show anything 100 meters, 300 meters away. It's an option. It all depends on how you work and what you want that particular scene file to do. So remember, any of these options can be changed and adjusted to suit yourself. So we'll click OK because I'm quite happy with that at the moment. If you remember, I said there were a couple of things in the atmosphere that I like to change. I wish I could just coordinate sometimes. Here we go. So photometric spectral, I think, should be the default at all times. But again, what do I know? Sky, fog and haze. You'll notice by default that the haze comes in. I'll show you. It comes in grey. Okay. Now I am a traditionalist in terms of art and illustration, and I was always taught that haze is actually generally a blue color, so I reset it back to blue. For me, it works better. It's my personal preference. Again, any of these settings will remain however you want them to be. It's entirely up to you. One of the other things I tend to set is I set that the sun should be fully visible at all times. Seems to make sense to me that if there's a light in the sky, we should be able to see it. And we'll click OK. Another thing we can set in our standard scene, one of the settings I always mess with is the position of the sun. I like to put it ever so slightly behind the focal point. It just sets up some interesting light and shade. Whereas if you have it, say, permanently in front, well, all your shadows are going behind the object. It's not a very interesting light projection, in my opinion. So I put it slightly behind, just so I can get a little bit of edge lighting. For me, it's more interesting. Remember, this is setting up where you're going to start your scene from. Also, when it comes to the sun, I switch off the softness. I generally don't put softness on the sun until I come to practically my final rendering. Sun softness can slow the rendering down. And when I'm testing and rendering just to see how the scene's going, I don't want to be thinking about, how soft is the sun. That's something for me, something to be considered right at the end. So I switch off automatic sun softness and make sure softness is at 0. Let's look at the next set of settings which I change for myself regularly and therefore have set up a permanent solution in the render settings. So I want to start with a preview just for speed, because the first few renders I know are going to be absolutely awful. and I just want a sense of where I'm going. Rendering active camera view, again, I don't need it to be the whole width of the screen at this stage. I can see down here how it's going and get a general idea of what the scene's beginning to look like. Aspect ratio, generally, I must admit, this scene at the moment is set up incorrectly, and I should be going for something like TV 16:9, which is HD, which is a standard aspect ratio, i.e. the ratio of the width to the height. But I've also set up other options which I'm not actually using at this point, which are the user settings. So I've switched off depth of field. There is no point leaving that switched on if you're not using it. It serves no purpose. But the one thing I have set up are my options in the anti-aliasing for a slightly better quality render. Again, this will be tweaked later on in the process, dependent upon what kind of items appear in the scene. If there's a lot of hard-edged modeling gone on, or cables and ropes, the anti-aliasing may need to be boosted. But for me, as a starting point, this is fine. Again, it's about what you want in a scene. Things like enable Z depth. I always render out Z depth. It's worth playing with in Photoshop just to get the depth of field, just to see what it looks like. And if it turns out to be rather nice and I want better quality, I'll come back to view and render it using depth of field. But at the moment, just don't need it. So leave it as it is. Again, there's nothing else really that desperately needs to be looked at here. But it's about setting things up which you like as a user. One of the things I have set up and use quite often is I've preset some cameras up. So by default, we have a main camera and we have a top camera. Now you can see I've added a left-hand side, a right-hand side, a front, a rear, and a terrain camera. Why have I done this? Simply because at the moment we can see from the left-hand side and we can see from the front, which is fine, but sometimes I want to see what's happening at the back and sometimes see what's happening underneath. So if we scroll through these cameras by using the camera controls up here, that's our top view. Not interested, very rarely use that. I don't know about you guys. But what I've got now is the left-hand side view, and I've deliberately made the left-hand side view camera orthographic. In other words, there's no perspective in there, so it will behave kind of like these cameras here. Yeah, there's no perspective in this side view and that front view. Same with the right-hand side, same with the front, rear. And one of the other cameras which was suggested to me by young Mr. Walter Beck, which I thought was a very good idea, was a terrain camera, which is already in situ, so that when you load a terrain, we're already looking at it and we don't have to reposition the camera or create a new camera. It's there all the time. Very useful, I thought. Great idea. The other thing you'll see in the World browser is I've already created some layers. These are just suggested layers. You just add a layer, click slowly twice on it, and you can change the title of that layer to whatever you want it to be. Again, I've just done some suggestions. I may not keep those. They may change their names at some point in the future. But for the moment, they're there really to remind me, because I do need reminding after all these years, that separating things out onto layers means that we can make each layer invisible when we're not working on it. And that means we're saving system resources. We're not overloading just for the sake of, oh, it looks pretty. Well, yeah, that's slowing your machine down. So we can create a series of layers, if, again, this is useful to you, whereby we can start to remember to separate things out. Imported objects, some of the imported meshes that we deal with can be huge, and a really good idea to put them on separate layers so that View doesn't have to try and render them or create them in OpenGL all of the time. So now we've created this default scene, that's all fine and dandy, but we need to be able to use it in the most efficient way and easiest way possible. If we remember, in the welcome panel, you can see these 5 templates. So the aim of the game is really to replace, because we're only allowed to have 5 in this display at the moment, is to replace one of these with our default scene, so we don't have to hunt for it every time we want it. I'm going to put the links for where the 2 saving positions are, one on PC, one on Mac, in the description below the video. But for now, being as I'm on a PC, I'm going to go to File. I want a consolidated archive because I want to save all the data within the scene. We don't want a fast save, which sacrifices data for speed of save. So I'm going to save a consolidated archive. And because I've done this before while I've been rehearsing, you may find it difficult to believe, but I actually do rehearse. We're going to go to the Windows drive, the C drive, and we're going to go to Program Data, which may be a hidden file on your machine. But if you go into the Windows Explorer, you'll be able to switch file visibility on through that path. So I'm going to double click and go into Eon Software, View, and Templates. Now we can see here the 5 scenes are listed. This is entirely alphabetical. The numbers really don't matter. What matters is the first letter, second letter, etc., dependent upon what naming convention you're using. So in this particular instance, if I wanted that at the top of the my scene to be at the top, we need to just play the game a little bit, and we need to put, I'm going to put 01 underscore A underscore my default. Okay, oh, I thought my fat fingers had hit another key. I'm going to take that, my default, and I'm just going to copy and paste that into the title. And then here in the description, this would be a reminder for yourself what's in that scene, whether it be a completely empty scene, whether it be a pre-made jungle ecosystem, deciduous or coniferous ecosystem, an underwater scene, whatever. So your description here. And we'll save. And fingers crossed, now when I go to Help and Show Welcome Panel, my default is at the top. Okay? Remember, that's entirely because, if I go to Save Consolidated Archive again, I slipped in that A in the title. Okay? So this title defines the position within that list, and Studio Render's just dropped off the bottom. So that's where we are saying, you know, defining its position, as it were, and here the shorter title, which was my default. Just remember one important thing: if for some reason there is a major update or you've had issues and you're reinstalling Vue, this file will be overwritten. So please remember to keep your default templates that you make for yourself stored on an external hard drive or whatever, something away from the hard drive, so that you can put them back in templates very quickly and very easily. So I hope you found this useful, if not a little bit entertaining today. If you've got any suggestions for future tutorials, please get in touch. Always good to hear from customers, because without you, we are nothing. So take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.